Welcome back to Leaving the Lies and Speaking Your Truth. We're here with part 2 of our interview with Lisa O'Neill. Lisa is talking about her experience in the cult called The Work. And we left off in part 1 with a question that I asked her. And that question was, what were some of the most traumatic things that happened to her while she was a part of the group? Lisa, could you answer that question for us now?
How long do you have? Well, I mean, I'll try to encapsulate it. I mean, the trauma really started from very early childhood, because what I remember as a very young child was just being dragged to endless meetings where he would yell a lot. You know,
Right.
I remember just a lot of yelling and laying on the floor at my mother's feet and on a dusty floor. I always remember the dust, and using like her purse as my pillow, because the meetings would be so many hours.
Yeah, I actually saw that one of the documentaries mentioned that some of those meetings lasted 12 hours.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they were at least, yeah, it was definitely an all-day affair on Sundays, and there was at least 3 during the week.
Wow.
And so, I mean, the first trauma was just basically fear, you know, being always very afraid of these meetings, knowing I had to go, knowing that they were almost never sort of pleasant or mellow. It would be some very bombastic speech.
Oh, and that would be so boring for a child.
It was awful. It was awful. I mean, I was only allowed to leave if I had to use the restroom.
Right.
Or sometimes if the kids got a little too rambunctious, there were like babysitters, appointed sitters, like in the back, you know, because the rented halls were either large or small, but there was always kind of a kitchen area.
Right.
So, I mean, that was kind of the initial setting the stage for trauma.
Right.
And then Julius's proposition, of course, which we touched upon. And my father dying was huge. That happened when I was 13. Now, my father was married to my mother, who was, you know, the one that brought us into the cult.
Right.
But he was never a part of it. He was never a part of it. And there was always contention in our household because of that. There were arguments, there were fights. There was my loving him so much, but thinking that I was supposed to think of him as not a good person. You know, my mom couldn't divorce him because she needed him to support the family. And he was a good dad. He was a hard worker. He struggled with alcoholism, and he worked very hard, 3rd shift. And, but I remember his sadness and his sort of resignation to my mom's will, you know, because he went along with her. When we lived in Massachusetts, that's where the cult started. We wound up in Connecticut. You know, we lived in a motor inn because we didn't even have a home. He didn't even have a job.
Right.
So he was very young. He had some health issues with his heart, and was just a sort of a depressed kind of man because of this. And he died of a heart attack. Pretty much in front of me. I mean, it happened at the hospital, but he was dying when he came home from work, and he was pale, and he was holding his chest. And I remember my mom kind of shuttling him away and telling him to lay down, and she was praying over him. And I remember just wringing my hands and biting my fingernails, like, let's get into a hospital. You know, I was 13. Let's do something. We have to do something. And she didn't call an ambulance. Excuse me, I dropped my glasses.
She was trying to do the faith healing.
The faith healing. And also, you know, in the back of everyone's mind was, this is a judgment. You don't interfere with someone being stricken.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, but there's a certain amount of human instincts that kick in. I mean, she was his wife, and she did eventually bring him to the hospital. And I just remember being in my room and knowing that I wouldn't see him again. Like I knew he was not going to come home. Right. And I remember it was the middle of the night when my mother came home with a white rose that one of the nurses had given her, and with her brother, my uncle. And I didn't even want them to say it. I remember just saying, he died, didn't he? And that was when I like to say, sort of in a poetic way, that the steel door just kind of clanged shut on any normalcy my life was going to have as a kid.
Because he was your only link to the outside world.
He was my link to sanity and normalcy, because my mom would go off on her shaking in the spirit things, and
Right.
he and I would look at each other and be like, Mom's doing her thing, and
Right.
I mean, he knew I was a part of it too, because he didn't even try to interfere with her with that, because it would have been a big battle. It would have been a huge battle.
Right.
He was like, let's just let her do her thing. And he didn't really want to know a lot because he knew how crazy it was.
Right.
So
I have a couple of questions about your father's death. So do you feel that the teachings of the cult or the group itself contributed to his death? That's my first question. My second question is, were you able or allowed to properly grieve his death being in that organization?
No. Nope. He was an unbeliever, so I was told very quickly that, for lack of a better term, like, he was sort of out of the way.
Right.
He was sort of out of my mom's way, and he was an unbeliever. He hardened his heart to God, and therefore his heart hardened, literally.
Right.
I think the stress of living this way contributed to his perhaps abusing alcohol, abusing food, smoking cigarettes. I mean, things
Right.
that do
hard on the heart.
Hard on the heart, but he was 38. That is very young.
Oh yeah.
That is, and I remember when I was a kid, when it happened, I was thinking, well, he's middle-aged, he's old, but that's because I was 13.
Right.
I realized later that's like a child to die of a heart attack.
Yeah, that's very young for dying of a heart attack.
Yeah, and I remember just being in shock in the days and weeks after, and my mom having all of her cult friends coming over to bring food and to sort of, comfort her, and being told, there was this woman that came over and said, well, I'm going to cast out the spirits of negativity from your home. This should be a time of celebrating and rejoicing. God will take care of him wherever he needs to be. And now the impediments are gone. Be ye not unequally yoked with the unbeliever.
Wow, you still remember it almost word for word.
Oh, yeah.
That must have been very traumatic.
I remember trying to listen to, like, my dad's favorite music. I remember trying to get comfort from my brother, who was very much in shock because he was really close to my dad. And I just remember the blur of being dropped off at the mall to buy something to wear to his funeral. Like, just being very alone with the funeral and with going to Massachusetts to be with his family, and being told to not dwell on it. I'm like, my dad just died.
Right. No, exactly. So it's almost and we've had similar things in our cult. I mean, even people that within the cult that would die, people were not allowed to grieve. Infant loss. We interviewed a girl. I think her name's Leanne, and you can find her interview. I think it's like 6 or 7 or 8, one of the earlier interviews, and she was not allowed to grieve the loss of her infant child, and was told not to cry at her baby's funeral that she had lost because it would upset the rest of the congregation. So it was her obligation to basically just look forward to seeing her baby at the resurrection, her daughter that she lost. And it's so sad when you're not able to do that, because then when you come out, you not only have to deal with the loss of the cult, you have to deal with this grieving process that you've never done, that you never really properly went through all your steps of grieving because you were forced to hold all that in. Don't cry, don't be sad, just move on.
Yeah.
That's traumatic.
And when trauma happens at whatever age you're at chronologically, you kind of stay a little stuck in that age emotionally.
Absolutely.
And I feel like I'm not going to say I'm immature right now, and I'm certainly not 13, but I just remember feeling like there was that door shut and there was no way to proceed through the 5 stages of grief. It was like, okay, chop, chop, we're going to get back to meetings. My mother didn't get us counseling. There was no grief counseling.
Right.
It was
I'm sure that mentally there was a part of you that still was 13 when you were 26 and you finally left. There was a part of you that was still 13 and still hadn't been able to grieve your father.
I never stopped being angry. I just never stopped being angry with God for allowing it, for my mom for not calling an ambulance, for all the people telling me, well, he had been warned about his attitude. Essentially I was made to believe that, like, God killed my dad.
Right.
And of course, when things like you just said would befall people in the group, it was just God is testing them.
Yep.
This is a trial because God feels that they're able to do it. You know, it's an example to the rest of us.
Yeah.
You know, the gift of discernment, it was always, well, what does that represent? This has to represent something. If you had a headache, don't take an aspirin, but realize you're doubting God because it's in your head. Oh, your heart is fluttering. You must have a heart that's not. You're laughing because it's exactly the same, right?
Yeah, I'm laughing because it's so ridiculous, but it is so similar, but it's just like, wow. You know, it's when you leave and you realize that the thought patterns, when I'm thinking maybe you just needed a drink of water, maybe you had a headache because you were dehydrated.
Maybe we believe that God also created scientists who make aspirin for us.
Yeah,
you know
exactly.
What I mean?
No, I agree. 100%.
There was a time during the documentary I was in where I was telling these sort of anecdotes, and the cameraman started laughing so hard that they had to stop filming. And he goes, "I'm so sorry, but it's just so ridiculous."
Yeah.
You know, like it was about some of the names we were given and the names we had to call our children, and the dispensation of putting a Band-Aid over our head and weird rituals.
Yeah.
But I mean, back to the trauma. So that was enormous.
Oh yeah.
And again, I couldn't leave. I felt myself divorcing and detaching from all this truth because
right.
Every bit of normalcy and all my normal instincts and feelings and emotions were being told were wrong. And I felt myself dying inside, like shutting down. But you can't leave. I mean, if that's all you know.
Well, especially not at 13. Where are you going to go at 13?
Well, yeah. And I always say that, like, my sane parent died and left me with the one who was not sane.
Right.
And I'm saying this with respect because,
right.
You know, my mother's still alive. We don't have a relationship, but, you know, I don't mean to disparage her. But these are my facts. I mean, this
right.
happened to me. So
this is your truth.
This is my truth. So, yeah, I mean, just that and not being allowed to be involved with school things, not being allowed to trust people, you know, anybody, because the world was
a scary place.
You were either for or against God, and he was calling himself God. And I remember being a kid thinking, well, how is anyone even going to know he's God? We're not like advertising or anything, you know, until the time came when he was telling us to go into churches, disrupt churches.
Wow.
There was a traumatic thing that happened at a meeting where he decided to make an example of his people as being bad parents, or we were the rebellious, disobedient children of God. So he decided to spank everybody and beat everybody with a belt. Well, I shouldn't say everybody. There were families and children he called up onto the stage.
People that were picked out.
And he made them take their pants down. He whipped them. And I mean...
In front of the whole congregation.
In front of the whole congregation. And all I remember is that moment when trauma happens and you get frozen and you just kind of... Something clicks off in the brain where you kind of can't believe what you're seeing or experiencing.
Right.
And I remember no one knew what the heck was going on because it was unusual even for
your group.
Well, I mean, I never saw anyone actually being struck. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
There's always a lot of threats, but you know, this is biblical and spare the rod and spoil the child, and you are a disobedient nation, and you parents better learn to chasten your children with the rod of correction. Blah blah blah. But I just remember so many people in the congregation just kind of looking down like, this is awful. And,
right.
You know, one of the women was 9 months pregnant, and he had her bending over to get spanked. And, you know, and little children being hit with belts. It was nauseating. I wanted to throw up. So that was a trauma.
Yeah.
And then just, then when we were told within the companies to start telling people what we believed, you know, we had to like humiliate our spirits inside of pride or of hiding the truth. And, you know, having to talk about it and having to tell people, having to put bumper stickers on our cars that said, God exists, he's a man, and you better stop sinning. Things were meant to be conversation pieces. Oh, what does your bumper sticker mean? Oh, what, you know, even getting like the vanity plates with your angel quality word of God. You know, mine was like abundance and affection. And like, you know, you were supposed to like just crazy things about your name and your word. And why is your child named that? And, oh, well, in the Bible, it says, you know, and then, you know, there was recruitment. People were telling people to bring in your sisters, your brothers, your,
Right.
within my mother's family, she brought in a lot of her many brothers and sisters with her, including her mom, my grandmother.
Wow.
But, and then of course the trauma that led me to leave was realizing my niece, who was 5, was being molested by my then mother-in-law's arranged marriage husband, who was right under my roof because they lived upstairs from us.
Right.
This was going on. And when I found that out and I told my husband, he was furious. That was his niece. And I remember him getting on the phone to try to call the upper echelon and find a way to actually talk to Julius. And I remember him hollering and yelling into the phone, and someone yelling back at him so loud, I heard the voice through his handset, pre-cell phones, of course.
Right.
Rebuking him
for questioning what?
For questioning something that was going on. And I just remember that was it. It was trauma, but it was also my mental vehicle out of there, my catalyst.
They crossed the line for you to where you're like,
well, because my daughter was 4. My daughter was 4, and this man lived upstairs. And I said, may my soul burn in hell. No one's touching my daughter.
Yeah.
So, and I remember from that point on, maybe several days, might have been longer.
Well, your motherly instinct was stronger than the indoctrination.
My motherly instinct to protect her was way stronger than my fear of this cult. I was like, I'm packing her up. I'm leaving. I told him I was going off to see a movie, which I actually did. I went one night in the rain, instead of going to a meeting, the meetings were always mandatory. And if you didn't go, you got a phone call.
Yep.
And, and even if you got excused from going, it was, where's the envelope? I remember driving in the rain and literally taking a left instead of going right. And I went just driving around and I said, I'm going to see a movie. That was my big act of rebellion. My first act of rebellion was to go see Driving Miss Daisy. Of all things.
It was a memorable moment. You still remember the movie.
It's my favorite movie.
It's
one of them. But no, I remember telling my husband, I'm getting out of here. I don't care what you do, where you go. No one's touching my daughter. And I basically put her in the car. I gathered up a bunch of bags of clothes and I went driving around the neighborhood until I saw, this was pre-Zillow and pre-apartments.com. People used to just put little placards out on their lawn, apartment for rent. And I went into kind of a crappy part of town where I knew I could find something I could maybe afford with some help. And I did. I moved into a garbage apartment and I got, enough support from my husband to pay towards supporting our daughter. And then I instantly had to work, and I had never even worked outside of the cult.
Yep.
So I got a caregiving job for an elderly woman, and she took pity on me because she didn't really know my story, but she knew I was struggling and had a child to support. So she would, and this was before my daughter was even in kindergarten. So she'd say, bring your daughter with you. You can eat here. I remember.
That's so sweet.
Very it was angelic, really. I mean, I still believed in that at the time too, that everything happens for a reason. And she was in my life. And I remember her saying, well, Christmas is coming. What are you and your daughter doing? And we had never really celebrated Christmas before. Right. And I was thinking, she's a little girl. I better get her something or get her.
Like, I don't know how to do Christmas.
What's a Christmas? So what is this thing? Which, of course, is ironic because it's the birth of Christ, which is the source of faith anyway.
Right.
And, God forbid we believe in Jesus. So this woman was so nice. I remember her giving me, like, a bunch of, like, Christmas ornaments from her attic and, like, a tree. And so I had that job, and then my daughter started school, and then something terrible happened where we lived. Her little kitten got killed by a person that lived there. So it was just like trauma after trauma. And I didn't know how to be a single mom. I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
And so, I moved. And then there was a former cult member that wanted to move in with me, but she was an alcoholic. And I found out she was a prostitute also.
Oh, gosh.
So it was, and just learning how to trust human beings. Anyone I came across, as my daughter's teacher, the crossing guard, a police officer, my landlord, learning to realize people were people, and not, the infidel, things that regular people who were raised conventionally take for granted. Yeah,
Right.
you don't like or love everyone you meet, but you don't think that they're of the devil.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
yeah, so just learning to trust humans and to trust myself and to not keep looking over my shoulder that this great judgment was going to come upon me. All I cared about at that point was survival, eating, paying my rent, and making sure my daughter was safe. And then, you know, that kind of just found its way into meeting my second husband, and having a child with him. And we got married, and, you know, we were a blended family, and that was normalcy too.
Right.
You know, he didn't judge me for my past or my story. And then, I mean, the marriage didn't work out, but, you know,
Right.
we're civil, we're amicable. And then here I am on my own and totally happy to live on my own. And I got into therapy about a year and a half ago, which was phenomenally helpful, because this therapist, you know, not only listened to my story, but got very, very involved in untangling me from that knot. You know, he says, we're going to help you heal from this. And so I told him everything. And,
Wow.
and little by little, just very gradually, I found my way into an introduction to a Christian-based, you know, my choice of what to believe, and
Right.
a relationship with Jesus of the Bible, and a feeling that no matter what the Bible says, you don't have the right to just cherry pick and interpret it to use as a club.
Right.
You can still have a relationship with God, and he can be a friend and a companion and an ally, and he's not here to kick your ass. And, you know, wow, I'm not evil. Like, who would have thought that I was created by name in my mother's womb before, you know, because my identity was always wrapped up in, well, I'm my father's daughter and he's flawed, and I'm my mother's daughter and she's crazy, and I'm whoever Julius told me I was. I was never just myself. I was never just myself. So it took years. I mean, I'm 54 now, and I'm just still getting to know myself every day and trust myself, and know that the world, even with all of its craziness, is still a good place.
Well, that's amazing, Lisa. And I think your story is certainly going to be an inspiration, not only for people who've more recently come out and might not be able to really see what their future is going to be after coming out of a cult, but also for people that have come out but really haven't dealt with their past fully yet. Because I think there's a lot of people that come out and they don't know how to deal with it. They don't even know how to face it. So they'll bury it for years and just keep pushing it down. But eventually, it just starts boiling up inside of you, and you have to let it out.
If you don't deal with it, it deals with you. And and I know a lot of people that I'm still friends with who have left the cult. And, you know, if this is their way of coping, that's fine. Whatever works for you. But they won't talk about it.
Right.
They won't talk about it with me. And they're like, nope, that was horrible. It has to stay in the past. I've got my successful life now. And that's great, but I never learned how to move forward with anything unless I dealt with my fear, my shame, my sense of why did that happen to me. I was held hostage, basically. You know, my you know, it's not hyperbole to say it's spiritual rape.
Yeah,
it's not done against your will.
I say the same thing in the show all the time. It is.
Yeah, it's spiritual pedophilia, because I was a child.
Yep.
And there's still a child in all of us. And if there's not someone or something that is nurturing that you can trust and talk to and believe in, you know, my message to anybody, the reason I go public with all this is because my message is to people who are in a cult or trying to get out or questioning. You're allowed to believe in yourself as much as you believe in what someone's telling you to believe. You know, you're allowed to believe in yourself, because I'm here for a purpose. I have a story, I have a message, and I'm going to write a book about this too. And I'll pre-plug it. It's going to be called The Work, the World, and Me in Between. And it's about the catalyst of being in it and getting out and surviving. And now not just surviving, but thriving.
You know? Absolutely. Well, when you write that book, you let us know. And we'll read your book, and then we'll do a little book review, and we'll have you come back on the show, and we'll have you talk about your book. That would be fun. We've done that with one of our ex-members. His episode, I think, is going to drop next week. Brandon Salo. We did a little like a promotion episode about his book. So when you finish your book, you let us know, and we will help you promote it and encourage it and spread the word. Try to get other people to read it, because I think it's very helpful for people that come out of those situations to be able to read, relate, hear other people's stories, whether it's watching interviews like this or reading a book of somebody else who's been there. Because the truth is that we're all, even though we weren't bonded in the same way, when I talk to you and I listen to you, I'm like, there's so much that is so similar that I do feel a bond to you and other people who've come out of a cult, because we understand each other in a way that anybody who hasn't been through this does not get it. They don't get it in the way or on the level that people who've been there and experienced it and lived it get it.
Yeah, because, briefly, like when I've tried to tell this story to people that don't understand cult indoctrination and brainwashing, even if they're very kind, they'll say things sometimes like, well, that sure was a small cult. Well, I never heard of that. So, another word, like, kind of implied it can't have been that bad. It wasn't Scientology. It's not the Moonies. It's not Waco. It's not Jim Jones. Gee, I never heard of that cult. And I remember saying to people, I don't care if a cult is millions of people or 300 or 400, it is just as toxic. And even if you're in I don't want to disparage any particular group by name, but even if you're in something that's almost like a book club, if your mind is being controlled and there's one authority, that's a cult. And if you look up the earmarks of a cult, that's what it actually lists. And I spread the word about this cult because a lot of people haven't heard of it, but it was terrible, and it was just as bad as Waco. It was just as bad as Jim Jones, because his followers would have done anything he said.
No, absolutely. And I think that it's one of those things where if people have an experience that they really don't get it or understand it. I remember divulging to an employer of mine, and I actually did home health care for a while too, and it was one of the people I took care of, and I had worked for them for probably close to a year before the subject came up. We were watching something on TV, and I kind of just opened up and told them. It was a older married couple, and I said, oh, I used to be in a cult. And they laughed because they didn't think I was serious. And I said, no, I really was. And they're like, really? And they're like, well, you seem way too normal to have been in a cult. And I'm like, well, we're not all weirdos.
Well, it's one of those words, too, that when you drop it into a sentence, it seems to instantly elicit a reaction. And people used to say to me, oh, you just love the shock value. And, because I used to call it a group or an organization. But when you drop the C word, word, people go, what? Oh my God, were you in Waco? Were you in Jim Jones land, whatever? And it's like, no, but I've read all those books. And I remember being at my job, my first home health care job after I left. I remember very specifically being in the den with my daughter when the news flash came on about Waco. And I stood there in front of the TV with my mouth open, because I remember thinking I left just in time, because something like that could have happened, And,
I was actually still in my cult when Waco happened, and they actually were saying, well, that happened to them to protect us. That happened to David Koresh and his group, and that was Yahweh's way of protecting us, so that won't happen to us.
There was always an explanation for everything.
It's amazing. So, I mean, and you kind of did, but do you have, and in closing, do you have any words of advice for anyone that might be currently feeling trapped or feel or think they're in a controlled group?
I think that right now there's a lot more resources to reach out. There's obviously the internet, which wasn't really a thing when I was struggling. There's groups like yours, there's Steve Hassan, there's books, there's, library books, or just on the internet. I say to people, educate yourself as much as possible. Be gentle with yourself. It's not your fault, whether you were raised in it like I was, born into it, or very important to have that mantra in your mind that it's not your fault, that you did nothing to deserve abuse.
Absolutely.
It's no different than trying to leave an abusive marriage or a relationship. Gaslighting is a real thing. Cognitive dissonance is a thing. Brainwashing is a thing, and it can be anywhere in life. It doesn't even have to be religious. But you start messing around with someone's desire to have an innate faith. It's really an ultimate violation. It's just as bad as physically. And so I would just tell people, keep believing in yourself, surround yourself with people that love you,
I love that.
and just try to find a way out.
Yeah,
You know,
I love that. That's an
hard.
awesome message, Lisa. And it's so many of you're repeating so many of the things that we have said on other episodes. It just resonates with our show so well, and it's such a good fit. I am so
And be
happy that
brave.
you took. Oh, be brave. There you go. That
Be
is a
bra-
good one.
say your truth. There's not going to be a beam of light that's going to shatter you into a million pieces. You know, say your truth. This
It
is
might
what
feel
happened.
like that the first time you open your mouth, but when you do it and then you realize, oh, look it, the sky's not falling. It's
right.
actually a really good healing feeling.
Yeah, and that if you do believe in a creative force or God or the universe, it's holding you. It's for you. It's an ally.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
So,
Well,
and God speaks through people. So I'm happy to have met you.
I'm happy to have met you too, and this has been an absolutely amazing interview. And I thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show to talk with us, to share your truth today, to speak your truth. And having said that, because of the message you just said, if there's anybody out there who's watching right now who has been thinking that they might want to come on the show, you might want to tell your story. If you think that might be therapeutic to you, if you think that might be helpful to you, reach out, send me a message, private message me on Facebook, Melody Post. Just send me a message and I'll add you to our list, and we'll try to get you on the show, because we want this platform for anybody who out there who's interested in sharing or telling their story. So thank you again, Lisa, so much for joining me today and for sharing your story with us. Can you hear me? Okay. Oh, yeah, that happens. Yeah, for some reason when you get a phone call, it'll stop your sound for a minute. Can you hear me now?
I tried to hit decline. My phone was ringing. I'm so
That's
sorry.
okay. That's okay. It happens. Again, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for taking the time to share your story with us. I so greatly appreciate it. It was wonderful.
And I'm so glad I found what it is you and Autumn are trying to do. That's
Oh,
her
yeah.
name, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
that is her name. Yep.
I appreciate the platform so much and the ability to
thank
share
you.
my story.
And again, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube page and our Facebook page, Leaving the Lies and Speaking Your Truth. We appreciate all the support we are already getting. And we just want to thank you for doing that. And anybody who hasn't done that, please go do that for us. Thank you, Lisa. You have a
Thanks,
great
Melody.
day. Thank you.